This is not your regular caregiver story. This is the shocking tale of a young woman who used sex to exploit wealthy old men, until the game turned on her. Secrets, betrayal, blackmail, and a scandal that shook Lagos. Welcome to The Caregiver That Had Sex with Elderly Men. Only on Emmy Stories, where the truth hits harder than fiction. Sandra tightened the laces of her cheap sneakers and adjusted her second-hand blouse. The mirror in the hallway of her shared apartment was cracked, but she could still see enough to fix her wig. Today had to go well. She was tired of struggling, tired of eating Gary for dinner, tired of borrowing from neighbors, tired of pretending she had it all together. She took a deep breath, tucked her CV into her bag, and headed out. Eden Homes looked nothing like a typical care facility. Tucked in a quiet neighborhood in Lekki, the compound was lined with flowers and trimmed hedges, like a mini resort. Sandra hesitated as she approached the gate. Caregivers wanted, experience not necessary, the sign read. "No here better money day," her friend had whispered. "Old men way day lonely, and they go pay anything for small attention." Sandra didn't need to be convinced. At the reception, a middle-aged woman in a cream uniform greeted her. "You're here for the caregiver position?" Sandra nodded. "Yes, Ma." "You'll be assigned to the private wing," the woman said after glancing through her documents. "Some of the men there are high-profile, retired CEOs, judges, a former senator. Keep things professional, and you'll do well." Sandra smiled politely, but in her heart, she was already doing the math. They led her down a quiet hallway with polished floors and soft jazz music playing from hidden speakers. Each room looked like a hotel suite. "Start here," the receptionist pointed. "Room 6. That's Mr. James. He'll need help with his medication and companionship during meals." Sandra knocked and entered. Mr. James sat in a large recliner, wrapped in a navy blue robe. His hair was white, and though his face was marked by time, his eyes were sharp. "You're not the usual one," he said with a faint smirk. "I'm Sandra," she replied. "Your new caregiver." He studied her, from her nervous smile to her curvy figure. "I see," he murmured. "Then sit." She obeyed, gently pulling the chair beside him. "I don't need much," he said. "Just someone who'll listen, and make me feel like I still matter." Sandra softened her voice. "Of course, sir. That's why I'm here." He smiled, but there was something else in his eyes, a hunger. Not for food, but something deeper. By the time she left his room an hour later, Sandra already had a sense of control. He talked about his past, his wife who had died 10 years ago, his children who rarely visited. Loneliness oozed from his every word. He asked questions about her life, and she gave just enough truth to sound real. Back in the hallway, Nurse Grace approached her. "Be careful with that one," she warned. Sandra tilted her head. "Mr. James. He's charming. But don't let charm fool you. Just do your job and go home." Sandra smiled. "Thanks for the advice." But as she turned away, her mind was racing. Charming and rich. That's a dangerous mix, for him. She peeked into the other rooms briefly. There was Mr. Henry, quietly sipping tea by the window, and Mr. Patrick, who winked as she passed. 3 old men. 3 lonely wallets. By the end of her shift, Sandra had made up her mind. She wasn't just going to work at Eden Homes. She was going to cash out. The next morning, Sandra arrived earlier than usual, her face glowing with shea butter and her blouse unbuttoned just low enough to tease without crossing the line. She brought Mr. James his tea, placing it carefully on the side table before sitting down with a sweet smile. "Morning, sir," she said softly. He looked up from his newspaper, eyes lingering a second too long on her chest. "I told you to stop calling me sir. It makes me feel ancient." "Just James," he said with a grin. Sandra chuckled. "All right then, James." He raised a brow, amused. "You're quick. I learn fast." That morning, she didn't just assist him with pills or adjust his blanket. She laughed at his old jokes. She touched his arm longer than necessary. When he told her she looked beautiful, she didn't shy away, she leaned closer. By noon, James reached into a drawer beside his chair and pulled out an envelope. "I like you, Sandra," he said. "And I know what it's like to need help. I've been helped too, back when I was younger and hungry." She blinked as he handed her the envelope. Inside, 10 crisp 1,000 Nigerian Nairas notes. "I didn't do anything," she said, pretending to hesitate. "I know," he replied. "But I'm not blind either." Her heart thumped. It was working. Over lunch, Sandra sat in the break room scrolling through her phone. Nurse Grace walked in, her expression unreadable. "You're getting comfortable quickly," Grace said, pouring herself a glass of water. Sandra smiled. "Just doing my job. Just make sure you don't add extra services. These men might be old, but people are watching." Sandra blinked innocently. "I don't know what you mean." Grace didn't answer. She just stared for a second longer than necessary, then walked out. Sandra's smile vanished. She needed to be careful. That evening, while helping James into bed, his hand grazed her waist. She froze, but only for a moment. "Sorry," he said, not sounding sorry at all. She gave a half smile. "It's all right." He looked at her, long and slow. "I could help you more, you know. Real help. Rent, clothes, phone bills. Things no one else has to know." She pretended to hesitate, then looked at the floor. "I'm not that kind of girl, James." "But you could be," he said, leaning forward slightly. She didn't answer. She let the silence say maybe. That night, she went home and stared at the money for a long time. She thought about her unpaid bills, the texts from people she owed, the shoes she couldn't afford. By morning, she had already made her decision. 2 weeks later, Sandra had moved from helping James with his meds to spending hours in his room. The nurses raised eyebrows, but no one had proof. She always left looking calm, clothes unwrinkled, hair intact. But James wasn't the only man she visited now. Mr. Henry had started requesting her too. At first, he just liked the sound of her voice, said it reminded him of his daughter. But the compliments grew bolder. The hand pats lasted longer. And Sandra? She leaned into it. She wore tighter skirts. She told them stories that made her seem both broken and beautiful. She painted herself as a survivor, a good girl in a bad world. And they bought it. Every single word. One night, James handed her a phone. "A little something," he said. "So you don't have to use that cracked one anymore." Sandra gasped, playing the perfect act. "This is too much." He touched her hand. "No, it's not." She smiled, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Mr. Henry has a Rolex. Mr. Patrick drives a Benz. This is only the beginning. Sandra now walked through Eden Homes like she owned it. She wore fitted blouses, smooth lipstick, and a scent that lingered just long enough to stir old memories in old men. Every step she took was calculated. Every smile, a weapon. Every innocent, "Good morning, sir," dripped with double meaning. She wasn't just a caregiver anymore. She was their desire, and they were her ATM. Mr. James had already transferred 200,000 Nigerian Nairas into her account. Mr. Henry gave her a gold necklace after one long afternoon walk where she accidentally cried about her sick brother in the village. Mr. Patrick, who once claimed he was too old for such things, had started writing her poems and slipping them under his teacup. But the brother in the village didn't exist. There was no dying sibling. No bedridden mother. Sandra lived alone in a one-room flat and sent money every weekend to a secret boyfriend named Kelvin, a smooth-talking hustler who promised her, "One day, we go blow." She'd never told any of the men about Kelvin. They were just stepping stones. One Sunday evening, Nurse Grace caught Sandra sneaking into the private kitchen with Mr. Patrick's room key. "Where are you going?" Grace asked, arms crossed. Sandra smiled sweetly. Mr. Patrick asked for a late snack. He says he sleeps better with biscuits and tea. Then why do you have his room key? Sandra froze for a split second, then laughed. He gave it to me. I think he gets lonely. Grace didn't laugh. Just remember what this place is, Sandra, she said quietly. It's a care home, not a nightclub. Sandra smiled again. Duly noted. But as she walked away, she muttered under her breath, "Jealous old goat." That night, in Mr. Patrick's room, he surprised her. He pulled out a small box and opened it. A gold bracelet. "Sandra," he said softly, "if I were 30 years younger." She giggled. "Then you'd be trouble." "I already am," he whispered, reaching for her hand. She allowed it. For a moment, she even leaned in. But her eyes flicked to the camera above the door. It was unplugged. She had done that earlier. This was routine now. She knew the angles, the risks, the rewards. But every game has cracks. One afternoon, Mr. Henry clutched her wrist tightly and asked, "Do you like me? Or do you just like what I give you?" Sandra blinked. For once, she didn't know what to say. She pulled her hand away and forced a gentle laugh. "Don't say things like that, Henry. You're special to me." But his eyes searched hers, and for a second, Sandra saw doubt, dangerous doubt. She left his room faster than usual that day. Later, at a bar in Acadia, she met Kelvin for drinks. He kissed her neck and called her, "My CEO." She rolled her eyes. "They're getting suspicious." "Then take more, cash out and bounce," he said. "This Lagos not cruise. Don't catch feelings." "I'm not," she replied quickly. But she wasn't sure if she was convincing him or herself. He leaned in. "You know the plan, baby. We get enough, you resign, and we move to Dubai. Start fresh." She nodded, downed her drink, and smiled. But something was gnawing at her, a feeling she didn't like. And in Eden Homes, someone had just started watching her closely. Something had shifted. Sandra could feel it the moment she stepped into Eden Homes that Monday morning. The nurses stopped talking when she walked into the staff kitchen. Two of the cleaners exchanged a quick glance. Even Nurse Grace didn't offer her usual sarcastic greeting. Everyone was watching her now, not just the old men. She adjusted her blouse, forced a smile, and walked confidently to Mr. James's room. But inside, even James seemed distracted. "You look tense today," he said, sipping his tea. "Just tired," Sandra replied. "Long weekend." He muttered, narrowing his eyes. She tilted her head. "Something wrong?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Nothing. I don't want to be the reason people talk behind your back." Sandra froze. "They're talking. I may be old, but my ears still work." She gave a small laugh. "Let them talk. Jealousy is loud." He didn't smile back. And for the first time, Sandra wondered if James was beginning to regret her. By noon, she found herself cornered in the hallway by Nurse Grace. "Are you free to talk?" Grace asked. Sandra sighed. "Not really. It won't take long." She led her into the medication storage room and shut the door behind them. "There's a rumor," Grace began, "that you've been visiting the men outside your assigned hours. That some gifts have changed hands. Even money." Sandra folded her arms. "Rumors are free. Evidence is expensive." Grace stepped closer. "I don't need proof to know what you are. But I will get it." "Is that a threat?" Sandra asked, her voice low. "It's a promise." Sandra smirked. "You're not the police." "No. But I care about these men. More than you ever could." Grace walked out without another word. Sandra stood alone in the dim room, pulse racing. They were closing in. That evening, Mr. Henry requested her again. When she entered, he was sitting by the window, unusually quiet. "Henry?" she asked gently. He looked at her with tired eyes. I think we should stop. Her heart skipped. Stop what? This, whatever it is. I don't want to be a fool. Sandra knelt beside him. You're not a fool. You're the kindest man I've met. But am I the only one? He asked, voice shaking. Be honest. Silence. Sandra reached for his hand, but he pulled it away. You've made me feel like a man again, he said. But now I don't know what's real. Tears pricked her eyes, but they were useless here. This was slipping out of her control. I should go, she whispered. And for once, she meant it. Outside in the hallway, she bumped into Brian, the man who had been introduced last week as James's son. She hadn't noticed him much before. But now, he was looking straight at her. Caregiver Sandra, he said, voice too smooth. Brian, right? He nodded. I've heard about you. Oh. She raised an eyebrow. Let's just say, you're popular. She smiled politely. I do my job well. He leaned closer. We should talk sometime. One-on-one. Sandra's stomach twisted, but she laughed it off. Maybe. As she walked away, she felt his eyes burning holes into her back. Later that night, in her apartment, she counted her money again. More than 700,000 Nigerian nairas in total. But for the first time, it didn't calm her. Something had changed. Henry was pulling away. James was growing cautious. Grace was sniffing too close. And now, Brian. He wasn't just watching her. He was waiting. For what? She didn't know yet. But she could feel it. The game was starting to turn. It started with a knock. Not the soft knock of a nurse. Not the slow shuffle of an elderly man. This one was loud. Firm. Intentional. Sandra was in Mr. James's room, fluffing his pillows and laughing at another one of his recycled jokes. But the moment the knock echoed, he stiffened. Come in, he said, voice steady. The door opened and in stepped Brian, dressed in black, eyes cold. Dad, we need to talk, he said, ignoring Sandra completely. Mr. James frowned. Can't it wait? Brian looked at Sandra now. Actually, no. She stood up slowly, trying to keep her composure. I'll come back later. No, stay, Brian interrupted. This concerns you too. Sandra glanced at James. His face had tightened, jaw locked. Brian reached into his laptop bag and pulled out a small silver object, a USB flash drive. Then he held up his phone and tapped the screen. Seconds later, a video began to play. It was her. Her in this very room, helping Mr. James into bed. But not just helping. Her hands on his shoulder. Her body leaning too close. Her voice soft, laced with promise. Sandra's stomach dropped. Brian looked at her. Smile for the camera, Sandra. What the hell is this? Mr. James snapped, suddenly sitting up straighter. Brian folded his arms. I installed a camera in your room last week. You said she was just helping you sleep better. I wanted to see how. Sandra's heart was hammering. This is illegal. You can't. Illegal. Brian laughed. You're a caregiver being paid to provide emotional support, not lap dances. Brian, enough, James growled. But Sandra could tell. James was more embarrassed than angry. She turned to him. I never forced you. You gave me gifts. You invited me to stay. But you didn't tell him you were also doing the same with Patrick and Henry, did you? Brian said sharply. Sandra froze. He knew. All of it. Brian stepped closer. I should send this to the management. Or the police. Or better, the press. Mr. James buried his face in his hands. Please, Sandra whispered, voice cracking. Don't do this. Brian smirked. I won't for now. She looked up, confused. What do you mean? I'm not reporting you, Sandra, he said calmly. I'm recruiting you. They met that night outside a quiet cafe. Sandra sat across from him, arms folded, walls up. "What do you want?" she asked. Brian leaned back, sipping his drink. "I've seen your game. You're good. But you made a mistake. You thought no one was watching." "I'm not proud of what I do," she muttered. He raised a brow. "Yes, you are. And that's okay. We're not that different." Sandra's eyes narrowed. "Speak clearly, Brian." "I'm not stupid." He smiled. "I want in. I don't need your body. I need your access. You have the keys, the trust, the charm. But I have the brains, and the blackmail material." She blinked. "Blackmail?" "Let's call it partnership," he replied. He tapped the USB against the table. "You keep playing your game. But now we split the profits. You take care of the men. I handle the secrets." Sandra stared at him. The devil in disguise. But he had her cornered. And she knew it. Slowly, she nodded. 50-50. He grinned. "Smart girl." As they stood to leave, Sandra's mind raced. She had just partnered with the enemy. But if she was going to survive this, she had to play smarter. Because in Eden Homes, the real patient now was her. Sandra stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her lip gloss. She didn't feel beautiful tonight. She felt trapped, like a bird in a cage she helped build. A few months ago, she was hungry, desperate. Now she had money, designer shoes, and a second phone. But she also had Brian, the snake that coiled tighter around her neck every day. He didn't just want a share of the money. He wanted control. "Smile," Brian said as he opened the back door of Mr. Patrick's Benz. Sandra slipped in beside the old man, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "Good evening, darling," Patrick said, his eyes lighting up. "Missed you," Sandra whispered, knowing Brian was watching from across the street. She had started wearing a small mic under her dress, his idea. Every laugh, every kiss, every promise she made to these men was now part of his archive. They weren't just partners anymore. She was his puppet. Later, outside Eden Homes, Sandra confronted him. "You said 50-50, she snapped, tossing a brown envelope at him. "Why did you collect from Henry directly yesterday?" Brian didn't flinch. He lit a cigarette and exhaled slowly. "Because I can. You're getting greedy." He looked her dead in the eye. "And you're getting sloppy. Don't forget who saved you from being disgraced." Sandra's fists clenched. "I don't need saving." "Yes, you do," he said calmly. "You're not a boss, Sandra. You're a girl with good hips and bad decisions. I made you efficient." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't reply. Inside, she was boiling. She met Kelvin that night, shaking with frustration. "Baby, you have to end this," she said. "Brian is eating deep." Kelvin sipped his beer. "Then flip the game." "How?" "Trap him. You trapped old men, didn't you? Use your body, get proof, and bury him." Sandra hesitated. "He's careful." "Then be smarter," Kelvin said. "Get him alone. Give him what he thinks he wants. Then destroy him." She didn't respond. But a plan had started forming. The next day, Sandra showed up at Brian's hotel unannounced. She wore a silky red gown and no makeup, the kind of look that made men think she was vulnerable. "Surprise," she whispered as he opened the door. He looked stunned. Then suspicious. "What's this?" "I'm tired of fighting," she said softly. "Maybe we should stop pretending we're just business partners." Brian hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. Inside, she poured them drinks. Sat close. Touched his arm. She watched him melt. But under her dress, strapped to her thigh, was a tiny voice recorder. "Tell me again," she whispered, leaning in. "Why did you start recording me?" Brian chuckled. "Because I knew you'd mess up eventually." And what else do you have? Oh, everything. Your transfers, your calls to Kelvin, even the fake brother. She smiled. You're thorough. I'm dangerous, he replied, kissing her neck. And then, the final nail. He whispered, I'm the reason James changed his will. She froze. What? Brian grinned. Oops. But she was already standing. Thanks for that, she said coldly, pulling the recorder from under her dress. His eyes widened. You? You just messed with the wrong girl. Sandra walked out of that hotel room with more than proof. She had power. For the first time in weeks, she felt like herself again. But she had no idea what was coming next. Because the man whose will had been tampered with was about to die. The call came on a rainy Tuesday morning. Mr. James is gone, Nurse Grace said over the phone, her voice flat. He passed in his sleep. Sandra sat motionless on her bed, the phone pressed to her ear. She had imagined this moment, but not like this. She expected a slow decline. Time to prepare. Maybe even a goodbye. But just like that, he was gone. Her stomach twisted. Then came the second thought. The will. At Eden Homes, the mood was somber. Nurses whispered. Patients cried. Mr. Henry refused to eat. Sandra wore a plain black dress, no makeup. She walked slowly through the halls, head bowed, playing the role of loyal caregiver with practiced grace. But inside, her mind was racing. What had Brian done? He claimed Mr. James had changed his will, just weeks before his death. That Sandra would be taken care of. That she was named. She hadn't believed him. Now she had to. 3 days later, at a quiet legal office in Ikoyi, Mr. James's family gathered for the reading of the will. Sandra stood outside in the hallway, waiting. Brian walked past her, smirking. She didn't speak to him. Inside, the lawyer cleared his throat. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that this document was updated and signed in the presence of 2 witnesses and video documentation. James's daughter rolled her eyes. Brian sat back, confident. Then the reading began. Most of the will was predictable. Land, properties, bank accounts, all distributed among children and relatives. Until. And to Sandra Ease, my caregiver during my final days, I leave 5 million Nigerian nairas, in appreciation for her companionship and comfort during a difficult season of my life. Gasps. James's daughter shot up from her chair. Who? Brian tried to look surprised, but Sandra could see it, the flicker of victory in his eyes. The room erupted. She's a gold digger. He wasn't in his right mind. This must be a forgery. The lawyer raised his hand. There's a recorded video of Mr. James reading this himself. It was his wish. Sandra, still outside, heard the shouting. Her palms were sweaty. She didn't expect this much. 5 million Nigerian nairas. Real, legal. And now public. Back at Eden Homes, everything changed. Some of the staff wouldn't meet her eyes. Others looked at her with a mix of envy and suspicion. And Nurse Grace? She cornered her near the laundry room. You manipulated a dying man, she snapped. You think this ends well for you? Sandra didn't respond. Grace stepped closer. He trusted you. And you sold that trust for cash. Sandra's jaw tightened. I cared for him. More than his own children did. Grace scoffed. You cared for his wallet. Sandra walked away, but her hands were shaking. It didn't feel like a win. That night, Sandra met with Kelvin. They're attacking me, she said. On Facebook, Twitter, even blogs. Kelvin nodded. Let them. You've got the money. Cash out and leave. But it's not in my account yet. There's still processing. Legal delays. Then lay low, he said. Stay clean. But it was already too late. Brian had leaked a clip, a quiet moment between her and Mr. James, from one of his private recordings. Nothing sexual. Just intimate. But it was enough to spark gossip. The caption, "How far would you go for 5 million?" The video was trending by morning. Sandra wasn't just a scandal. She was headlines. The burial was held at a private cemetery in Ikoyi. Dignitaries in black suits, weeping grandchildren, and long-faced politicians pretending to mourn. Sandra stood at the far back, hidden behind dark glasses and a plain black scarf. She didn't belong among the family, but she had to be there. Mr. James was gone. And she couldn't tell if she felt grief or guilt. The ceremony was quiet until the priest said, "He lived a full life surrounded by those who loved him." Sandra's chest tightened. He died with a camera above his head, she thought. Watched like a specimen. Because of me. Because of Brian. After the final prayer, the crowd began to disperse, but not before a loud voice rang out. "She's here. That's her. The one who seduced our father." Gasps followed. Heads turned. Brian stepped forward, calm as ever, microphone in hand. "There's a camera?" Sandra's heart stopped. "I know this isn't tradition," he said, "but since the public already knows her name, I think they deserve the truth." He turned to the mourners, reporters, and phones now raised to record. "This is Sandra. She was my father's caregiver. She was also his companion, his comfort, his addiction. And now, his millionaire." People began murmuring, some filming, some just staring. Sandra took a step back. Brian wasn't done. She didn't just take care of him. She targeted him, manipulated him. She made him change his will just weeks before his death. "My father wasn't weak, but he was lonely. And she took advantage of that." Sandra's mouth fell open. Brian had destroyed her, on camera, in front of Lagos's elite. And she couldn't say a word. She ran. Down the gravel path, away from the stairs, the whispers, the flash of a reporter's camera. She got in a Bolt and told the driver not to speak. By the time she got home, her face was everywhere. Twitter. #Sandra the Seductress. Instagram, 5 million naira caregiver. Even blogs she'd never heard of were using her picture. The next day, her landlord knocked. "Sandra, I need you to move out." She blinked. "Why? I already paid rent." "My daughter saw you on TV. She's crying. This is a respectable compound." She slammed the door in his face. Kelvin called a few hours later. "Baby, lie low for now." "I am lying low," she shouted. "I'm hiding in my own house. I told you not to trust Brian. You were the one that told me to trap him. Well, you failed." Click. He hung up. She stared at her phone, then threw it across the room. The screen cracked. Again. A week passed. The 5 million Nigerian nairas hadn't even hit her account. Legal battles were brewing. James's daughter had filed an injunction to challenge the will. And Brian? He was silent. Gone. Nowhere to be found. And Sandra? She had no money. No allies. No home. Just a name trending for all the wrong reasons. Her reflection in the cracked mirror stared back. The same mirror from months ago. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She wasn't desperate now. She was destroyed. And for the first time in years, Sandra cried. Not to manipulate. Not to perform. She cried because she finally saw the cost of her greed. Sandra sat alone on the edge of a hotel mattress, staring at the one thing she had left, her cracked phone. The room stank of dust and mildew. The fan squeaked every time it turned. The receptionist had warned her not to bring visitors, and she had lied and said she was just staying for a night. It was day 5. No money. No messages. No Kelvin. She scrolled through Instagram. Her old photos were filled with comments now. Homewrecker. How does it feel to be a disgrace? This is why men don't trust women. She tried to delete her account. It wouldn't matter. The screenshots had already gone viral. The news channels had moved on. Politicians were back to campaigning, celebrities were posting beach photos, and Eden Homes had issued a cold statement. We deeply regret recent events involving former staff. We have launched an internal review and wish to reaffirm our commitment to professionalism. They didn't mention her name, but everyone knew. Nurse Grace was now head of supervision. Mr. Henry had requested to be transferred to another facility. Mr. Patrick's family released a statement asking for privacy. Brian. Still silent. The snake had vanished. Sandra had been the face of the scandal. And now she was disposable. She tried calling Kelvin again. Switched off. She called one of her ex-clients, a man she had briefly flirted with before Eden Homes. Please, I just need 10,000 Nigerian nairas to eat, she whispered. He laughed. Oh, now you're asking instead of seducing? Must be serious. He hung up. Her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten that day. Or the day before. The 5 million Nigerian nairas? Still frozen in legal limbo. Her lawyer stopped picking her calls. Then came the final blow. An old friend sent her a link. Exclusive. More videos of Sandra leak, the secret life of a Nigerian caregiver. She tapped it. It was a montage, her voice in Patrick's car, the mic under her blouse, a blurry image of her adjusting her dress in Mr. Henry's room. It was edited with dramatic music, spliced with photos from her Instagram, and framed to look like a documentary. She played them all, the voiceover said. Sandra threw the phone across the room again. But she couldn't break it more than it already was. Just like herself. A week later, she left Lagos. She sold her shoes. Deleted all her social apps. Dyed her hair with cheap dye from the market and moved to a small town in Ogun State. No one there knew her. She got a job at a local clinic as a cleaner. Not a caregiver. Not anymore. She earned 12,000 Nigerian nairas a week, barely enough for food and rent. She scrubbed floors, washed bedsheets, kept her head down. And still, she flinched whenever anyone said her name too loudly. One afternoon, while mopping the hallway, she heard nurses whispering. Have you seen that viral video of the caregiver girl? Which one? The one that used old men to rise. They say she lives around here. Sandra's hands trembled. She gripped the mop tighter and kept scrubbing. They didn't recognize her. But she knew. The past doesn't die. It just changes address. The church bell rang in the distance as Sandra stacked used bedding into the laundry bin. Her back ached from bending all day, her palms were rough, and her knees had darkened from scrubbing. The clinic in Ogun State was nothing like Eden Homes. No polished floors, no jazz music, no silk curtains. Just stained walls, tired nurses, and the constant smell of Dettol. But no one knew her name here. She liked it that way. Until the day he walked in. It was a Thursday. Quiet. Rain drizzled gently outside. Sandra was mopping the front corridor when she heard a familiar voice. Slow, deep, calm. Excuse me, I'm here to visit Mr. Benson. She turned. And froze. Brian. He hadn't aged a day. He wore a clean polo shirt and designer shoes. His beard was neatly trimmed, his phone gleamed in his hand. She panicked. But he had already seen her. Well, he smiled. Fancy meeting you here. Sandra dropped the mop. What are you doing here? She hissed. Looking for a family friend, he said. Didn't know I'd find a ghost. She stepped back. Leave. Now. He laughed. Relax. I'm not here to expose you. Everyone already did that. What do you want? Brian looked around. Funny thing, Sandra. The last time we met, you were wearing a red gown and plotting my downfall. Now you're scrubbing floors. Life really moves. Her jaw clenched. Congratulations, he continued. You're finally what you pretended to be. A nobody. She slapped him. Hard. He staggered slightly, then smiled. You haven't changed a bit. Get out, she whispered, eyes burning. Brian leaned in. You thought I ruined you. But you ruined yourself. You forgot. Greed has no loyalty. He walked away. No cameras. No threats. Just that voice, echoing in her mind. That night, Sandra sat on her bed, staring at the ceiling. No light. No food. No future. But she wasn't crying. She was numb. Completely. The next morning, the clinic received a delivery, donated supplies and food, sponsored by a Lagos-based charity. The truck driver mentioned something odd. Guy that owns the charity said it's to support caregivers who've been through hell. Sandra didn't react. But when she opened one of the boxes, a small envelope fell out. No name. No logo. Just one note. Sometimes the best punishment is letting you live to feel everything you caused. Her hands shook. There was no signature. But she knew it was Brian. A month passed. Sandra kept working. One day, an old man was admitted, frail, blind, and forgotten by his family. He mumbled nonsense, refused food, and clung to her like a child. She fed him, bathed him, cleaned up after his mess. One night, as she wiped his forehead, he suddenly said, "Thank you for staying." Tears welled up in her eyes. Because this time, she wasn't doing it for money. She was doing it because no one else would. The local nurse who supervised her whispered, "You're good with the patients. You ever think about becoming a real caregiver again?" Sandra just smiled faintly. She didn't answer. She knew she could never wear that title again. Not after what she'd done. But maybe, just maybe, she could become human again. Some people chase money, but forget the price they'll pay when the truth comes knocking. What do you think Sandra deserved, sympathy or consequences? Let me know in the comments. And if you love stories that shock, twist, and leave your jaw on the floor, this is just the beginning. Subscribe to Emmy Stories, hit the bell, and don't miss the next one.